episode. And if you've missed any of my previous ones, everything kind of ties together, dives a little bit deeper into things. You can look back through the podcast and find them in anywhere from Spotify to Apple Music to YouTube and on Rumble. You can familiarize yourself with some of the concepts I'm presenting here. And I just keep everything at a basic level because that's where human creativity lives. Okay, so let's get started with another one of these discussions from a purely musical standpoint, and it doesn't throw out unnecessary emotions. Yes, it starts conflicts, but without friction, you can't have creativity. I'll explain that in a little bit. In this episode, I'm going to discuss and go after producers. Yes. I'm not going to attack you personally, because that's just dumb. But I'm going to analyze and break down everything a producer does and how we need to get away from it. Point blank, done. Okay? Yes, it's going to be a little bit of controversial, which it shouldn't be in the first place. And then I'm going to invoke some ancient wisdom passed down by Aristotle. If you don't know who that is, go and type it into Google, where most people get their little Google certifications from, instead of experience and actual studies. So let's go. All right, so I'm going to start out with a statement. A statement that shouldn't be controversial in the first place, like I mentioned before. So I'm going to say something that would immediately upset a portion of the modern music world. Okay? So here it is. Most mainstream producers today are not composers. And they're pretending they are has done measurable damage to music. Now, before you rush to the comment section, with a laptop full of plugins and hurt feelings, it's not really an attack on technology. It's an attack on misplaced credit. Okay, because somewhere along the way, we stopped asking who is composing and started rewarding who is assembling. Those are two different things, not the same thing. Okay, I'll explain. Just stay with me. So let's ground this in something solid before all the emotions take over. Okay, so for most of music history, a composer was someone who conceived musical ideas internally. They developed them over time. Okay, they understood harmony, melody, rhythm, and form. They made intentional decisions about musical direction. So think of Bach. Bach didn't start with a vibe. He didn't browse loops. He didn't scroll presets. He constructed musical thought voice by voice and function by function. Now, before anybody dives into here saying, well, it was a different time, he didn't have any of that available to him. If he did, he might have used it. I said, no. These are learned people that has honed their craft and became the masters. Okay? They were once a student, then they became the master. For future us to learn from. Not just leave it back here because someone wants to slap a modern label on something called progress or whatever. No. To have actual progress, you must absorb the wisdom from the past. You must absorb the knowledge from the past. That's how you push things forward from a human standpoint. Okay? So knock off that, there's a different time, he didn't have all this or else he would have. That's just a circular reasoning. Okay? It's not actual thinking critically about anything. Okay? So, you fast forward a few centuries, even modern film composers like John Williams, they still operate that way. Using motifs and thematic development, okay, harmonic storytelling, long form structure, that is composition. Let's contrast it with modern mainstream production. Okay, let's get into it. So, what producers actually do today? Okay, so let's be precise. No straw men here. Okay, A modern mainstream producer, they often select a tempo, choose a key, loads a drum loop, adds a bass loop, stacks pre-voiced chords, adjusts the equalizer and compression. Okay, then repeats the loop for 3 minutes. Is that music creation? Technically, sure. Is it composition? Only in the loosest, most charitable sense of the word. Okay, because musical decisions like melodic contour, harmonic movement, voice leading, development, they're either pre-decided by software, okay, or they're removed entirely or intentionally minimized. That's not composing from the inside out. That's curating prefabricated material. It's like a prefabbed house. You have no say in the actual construction and foundations of it. You just kind of, okay, I want this, and this, put it all together, slap it together, and hope for the best. Okay? That's basically what we're doing here. That's what they're doing. Pick something off the shelf, throw it in the cart, press play, boom, you got something that's something. Okay? So, on the flip side, composers, they will start with silence. Producers, they start with a sound. And that is the most important distinction. Okay, a composer begins with nothing, silence. Then asks what should happen. Why it should happen. Where should it go? Okay, a producer, they often begin with a loop, a preset, a template, a grid already deciding time and feel, even though feel is not really much in presets, actual feel of music. But that difference, it matters, because when you start with pre-made material, your creativity is reactive. It's not generative. You're responding to someone else's decisions. And yes, some producers can transcend this, but in mainstream production, it doesn't reward that. It rewards speed, consistency, predictability. Like I was talking in the last podcast, algorithms. It's all based on that reward system. It's a surface level reward system that really doesn't do anything for us musically. Okay? So, when I said I was going to invoke ancient wisdom and bring up Aristotle, okay, from his point of view of philosophy of the world and stuff is just kind of timeless, he would have hated loops. Okay? So if he was in the music at this time, he probably would have just dove into a cave and shut his ears and kept thinking philosophy. Okay, so I'm going to invoke him properly here. So since the persuasion that matters here, I'm going to build off his philosophy. Okay, and music built on loop lacks development, narrative arc, causal progression. It is static by design. Okay, so historically, musical authority, it came from mastery of form, understanding of harmony, long-range thinking, and today, authority often comes from streaming numbers, playlist placement, brand partnerships. Those are not musical credentials. Okay, so emotion in composed music emerges from attention and release, expectation and delay, contrast over time. Loops, they eliminate the contrast. Okay, so after all that, what is actually left? You get texture, you get loudness, you get repetition. That's not the emotional depth. That depth that I'm always bringing up in all these discussions. Okay, that's just simply sensory stimulation. You ever heard of sensory overload? Same thing here. Go for the loud impact and just see what happens. That's today's. Okay. So looking back at composers, they had a lineage. Producers, they have updates, sort of like a robot. The older musicians, they studied composers. Jazz musicians, they studied Bach. Rock musicians, they studied blues and classical harmony. Okay, the songwriters, they studied orchestration. Stevie Wonder, he didn't need a loop pack to write any kind of harmony. Paul McCartney, didn't wait for a plug-in update to write a melody. They internalized musical language. Modern producers, they study the DAWs, trends, algorithms, sound packs. It's not a lineage. It's a supply chain. It's just giving into robotics and embracing that robotic kind of feel and kind of like whatever they're calling transhuman stuff now. That's just what they're internalizing, other than the music itself. They're relying on the supply chain. Okay, so why, the loop culture, it flattens musical thinking, right? So why does it do that? Because loops, they're seductive. They sound finished. They sound professional. Okay, they remove friction. Okay, and friction is where the growth actually happens. Okay, when harmony doesn't change, the ear stops expecting. When rhythm doesn't breathe, the body stops responding. Okay, when form doesn't evolve, the attention fades. That's why so much modern music works best. Works best as background noise, content filler, lifestyle ambiance, which is fine, but let's just stop pretending it's compositional art. That's like duct taping a banana to the wall and calling it art and charging an exorbitant amount of money for it. This is what this is. It's not compositional art. At best, it's elevator music. And we have elevator music for a reason. It doesn't ask you to listen. Neither does this loop stuff. So neither does most loop-driven mainstream music. It doesn't ask you to listen. It's just there. Okay, so producers, they replaced the composers because it was just straight up efficient. Okay, this didn't happen, because they're evil or whatever, but it happened because loops are fast. Talent can be expensive. Composition actually takes time, if it's good. So like algorithms, they reward the sameness. Producers, they didn't really overthrow composers. The industry outsourced musical thought. Okay, it kind of goes back to how music affects your thoughts, right? And I might get into like the sound waves, the brainwaves thing right now, but the industry that took music, or that didn't really take music, but the industry music finds itself in, the current one, they decided to outsource all this good stuff, right? They started to outsource the talent, the actual knowledge, the actual skill, okay, and your actual thought. Let that sink in for a minute. If you can think, break it down critically. They outsourced how you think about music. Okay? And because of that, we celebrate the outsourcing as innovation. It's not progress. At most, it's cost cutting. So like what we lose when we abandon composing, okay, when we stop composing, music stops teaching us how to listen. Harmony, it stops challenging. It stops challenging your expectation. Melody, it stops leading emotion. Time stops mattering. We don't lose the sound. We lose the meaning. And like no amount of side chain compression can bring that back. The uncomfortable conclusion to all this. Okay, ready for it? Here it is. Producers are not composers by default. Loops are not ideas. Templates are not imagination. And repetition is not development. Music made entirely from pre-programmed material, it's not evil. It's just limited. And we should treat it accordingly. There's nothing wrong with elevator music. But we don't build cultures around elevators. Okay? So, we need a return to human intention. This is what it comes down to. If music is going to matter at any part again, not just exist, we need to reward people who think in melody, and they shape the harmony, they design form, take time, risk their silence. We need the composers again, not assemblers. And if it sounds condescending, good, because music deserves higher standards than just convenience. An entire culture built on convenience can't survive very much into the future. It's like the old saying, easy times make weak men. Okay? Doing everything the easy way makes for weak products, weak music. And that's what we're seeing in the mainstream today, is that weakness. Relying on all the technologies. I've discussed technologies in previous ones. Making it the center, making it a crutch of music. It doesn't help anything. It drags everything back down. Relying on that stuff, you get everything's robotic. Who wants to be a robot? There might be some of you out there that want to be. But when it comes down to life and actually experiencing every facet of it and making it count, making your music actually make people feel something, convenience, this is not the way to go. You can fight with me out of emotion, but logically you won't make sense. It doesn't matter. Compare today to actual composers. Okay, it doesn't even have to be a composer from 100 years ago. Take a look at John Williams's stuff in his films, from earlier films and stuff. That's all out of their heads. It's actual knowledge put into practice. Most time that might be hard today, but you got to get there somehow. Think about it and dig into these topics. If you want to know more and have more discussions, I guess, or if you want to come after me, it doesn't matter. But you can find me in Max Music Collective on School. The link will be down in the description. Click on it. Let's have a conversation together. I'm more than willing to talk to you musically. Musically and logically. Okay, so check it out. I'll put the description down there. That's Max Music Collective on School. I'm always there, and we're always discussing. Come join us and check it out. I'll see you next time.